How do you build a high-performing culture? This is Culture Architects. Candid conversations with extraordinary leaders sharing their biggest successes, failures, and lessons learned on their culture journeys. Here's David J. Friedman.
Welcome back to my conversation with Dr. Roger Gerard, business leadership author and the owner of Sloan & Gerard Consulting. Last time, Roger shared how he learned the ropes of leading people straight out of college. In this episode, we're going to pick up where we left off, and we're going to talk more about how leadership is the largest factor, really the profound difference, as Roger calls it, behind different working environments and different work cultures. When you make the observation, as you have over your extended career, that it's largely about respect, that leaders need to demonstrate respect for the teams that they're leading. I'm curious about just your point of view. Why do you think that doesn't exist? I mean, even outside of the institutional structure, if I'm a leader, whether it doesn't matter what the structure is, I'm still a human being. Do you think that many leaders, and obviously not everybody's the same, so we're talking about generalities here, but do you think that many leaders simply don't respect, or they are unaware of how the way in which they're behaving may be coming across as lack of respect?
Beautiful. They don't know that they don't respect. Mm-hmm. And let me tell you a funny little story about I sent a group of executives as part of a week-long retreat. I sent them back to their workplace for a 2-hour experiment. Okay. So 20 guys, 20 execs went out to their workplace, and their charge, their assignment was to go and see. Mm-hmm. All that I asked them to do was go and spend an hour, watch what's going on, and be prepared to come back and tell me what you saw. Okay. Dutifully, they all went out. They spent their time in their units. They came back, and it was amazing to hear their reports. Their reports were, I saw this problem and I fixed it. I saw this person struggling and I helped them get over the struggle. I saw this resource need, and so I made sure they had the resources they were supposed to have. It was one story after another of executives going in and fixing problems. Mm-hmm. And I told them that they all failed the assignment. Their job was to go and see and report back what they saw, not to fix problems. In fact, every one of the problems could have been fixed by the staff themselves. Hmm. And instead of helping them do that, they fixed it for them. Mm-hmm. That's enabling dependency. That's not leadership. But this is what leaders often think their job is to go fix things. No. Their job is to empower and enable the professionals in their charge to work their own day, to do their own work, to do their own problem solving, and to take pride in that and take responsibility for their daily work. That's what a leadership does. Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like, in your experience, certainly this group and many others, we're seeing leadership as my job as a leader is to fix problems versus my job as a leader is to empower my people and develop my people to become more effective people themselves.
Perfectly stated. Perfectly stated.
And so as you think about that, so is that mostly, in your view and experience, then simply a training issue, that we need to provide leaders with better training to understand, number one, what their role really is, and then number two, how to do that role more effectively?
Training is part of it, but it's not the whole picture. Okay. I would start with selection. Okay. You got to make sure that if you're putting people in a leadership position, they're prepared for a shift in how they see themselves and how they conduct their daily work. Mm-hmm. If you take a scientist and put them in a leadership role without any proper orientation or training, without any other influence, they're going to take a scientific method approach to their leadership because that's what they know.
Sure.
If you spend some time finding people in that field who also have a natural orientation to human relationships, well, then you might have a better leader. They may not be your greatest scientist, but they might be a greater leader than the pure scientist who comes into the role. I have had the privilege of working with a couple of research foundations in my work, and people in the research industry are wonderfully, wonderfully trained to be excellent scientists. They really understand the scientific method, the research methodologies, and everything that goes into that. I can tell you for a fact that if these foundations needed new leadership, they needed to bring the leadership in from the outside because there weren't the raw materials for leadership within the scientific ranks. Now, that's a pretty controversial thing to say, but leaders have a different set of skills. They have a different set of perspectives on how things work. And you need to respect that and honor that. One of the things that concerns me today is that leaders in many industries are not being respected, and leadership is a practice that needs to be respected.
And what does that mean?
I've seen.
What would it look like for leadership to be respected? What does that actually mean?
Well, I'll tell you what it looks like when it's not. Let's say a physician moves into a leadership role and becomes a chief medical officer. Suddenly, the docs in the organization no longer perceive this person as a colleague. They now perceive him as a suit. And it's us guys versus them guys from that point forward. That's a disrespectful approach to the relationship.
So I mean, I hear what you're saying there, and I want to push back a little bit on just trying to understand. It's one thing to say, well, leaders need to be respected. How does that happen? I mean, you can't just go to the staff and say, all right, guys, you got to start respecting these leaders more. So it's one thing to say they need to be respected, but how do you create that? How do we do something about that?
Yeah, my mother used to say, if you have to ask for respect, you probably don't deserve it.
It's probably true. It may be true. But how do you create that? I mean, what I really, and I'm pushing hard a little bit here because for our audience sake, I want to make sure people can walk away and say, all right, there's something I've learned here that I can do something with. So I'm listening to this and I hear you, Roger, saying that leaders are a different breed than others and that we got to select the right kind of people. We got to give them the right training and they need to be respected.
Yeah.
What do I do to make sure they're being respected?
All right. I advocate that leaders make 5 promises and then keep those promises as if their life depended on it.
Let's go.
I'll give you all 5.
Great.
Promise number 1, I will listen to you and take what you tell me seriously.
Sounds like a good one.
I may disagree with you in that process, but you'll know why I disagree with you. But I am going to listen and I'm going to take what you have to tell me seriously. That's promise number 1.
Okay.
Don't discount what people come to you with. Promise number 2, I will help you learn and grow as you practice your professional work.
Okay.
I'm going to provide you with whatever you need to keep your training up to date, to keep your knowledge up to date, to keep your experience up to date, but I'm going to help you grow and learn in your profession. Okay. Promise number 3, I will help you be wildly successful. I want you as my professional staff to be successful. And if there are obstacles in the way of that, if there are things that are preventing your success, you need to tell me, and we need to work together to remove those so you can be successful in your profession. Okay. Promise number 4, I will make sure that you're compensated competitively. Now, what that means is probably 60 to 65% compa ratio because data lags. You never, anytime you get a data report on compensation for professionals, it's about 6 months old, maybe a year old, and you have to get ahead of the 50 percentile comp ratio. So if I'm going to promise you that you're going to be paid competitively, you're going to be making at least, if not more than what our competition pays.
Okay.
Promise number 5, I will have your back when things go wrong. Not if, when they go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to be disciplined when things go wrong. You're going to be helped. You're going to be trained. You're going to be helped to go through that and take responsibility for it and get things right.
Mm-hmm.
These 5 promises are golden promises. And if you make them and keep them successfully over time, people are going to respect that. They're going to respect that as a leader, you had their back, you helped them be successful. They are having all of the knowledge and skills and training that they need to be successful in their practice. And trust builds.
Mm-hmm.
Trust builds as the promises are kept. Once you have established that trust relationship, and it can take many more than months, sometimes years, but once you establish those relationships, people aren't going to want to leave.
Yeah.
They're going to want to stay because, in the Gallup research that's been done on engagement, what they tell you is that the single most important factor in professional engagement is the relationship they have with their one-up.
Yep. I've seen that many places.
That happens because of promises made and promises kept.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so clearly then, if I'm a leader, to the extent that I'm making those kind of promises and more importantly, keeping those promises so that I have that kind of a trust-built relationship with my team, we're going to have a better team. We're going to have a better relationship. They're going to be more engaged. They're going to be more successful. So it's critical then that leaders learn how to do that.
Yes.
You were talking before about one part of that is training. One part of that is selection. We've got to select people who are at least have a higher predisposition to being able to be taught to do those things. Some people are more likely to be able to do that than others. What are some things that listeners can do if they're in leadership roles to be better at finding people? So I'm interviewing somebody to be in a leadership role. Maybe I need to bring them in from the outside because, to your point, depending upon how they got into roles, they may have a strong scientific bias that may not be as humanistic a bias, depending upon where they're coming from. So there's some aspect of that. But now I'm interviewing some potential people. What are some of the things I'm looking for in interviewing to help identify who might have a higher probability, and recognizing we're all just trying to stack the odds in our favor. There's no guarantees here, but we're trying to stack the odds in our favor that the person I'm interviewing, the man or woman, has a higher predisposition to being able to learn these kinds of skills if they don't have them now. What are some things I'm looking for when I'm interviewing? How do I figure that out?
I love that. There are 2 factors to selection. You select people in, but you also select people out.
Okay.
I want to talk with the select people in first, because that's the question that you asked. I'll tell you a story about an engagement I had way back in the early 80s. I was a creative executive in a consulting firm in the Detroit area, responsible for some significant work with a couple of international organizations. I can't name them, but what I can tell you is that the project was all about leadership development, and we were creating an international leadership system for that company. I was looking for a couple of management types to manage a couple of projects. And I had 2 candidates that I was looking at, one with stellar credentials, great references. This guy walked into my office and we had just a marvelous conversation. And at the end of the conversation, I asked him if he would mind taking a portfolio that I had prepared and give it a once over and give me a recommendation on how that situation in that portfolio would be addressed. And it had multiple documents and all kinds of things in it. And he asked if he could take it home and come back to me in 2 days with an analysis and a report. And I said, fine.
Mm-hmm.
And he left. And then the next candidate came in, and she went through the same process. She didn't have quite the experience that the first guy had. She had glowing references. She really had energy. And as we were having our conversation, I did the same thing. I gave her
Mm-hmm.
exactly the same portfolio and asked her if she would mind taking a look at it. She opened it immediately. And as she opened it, she started scanning the documents and began asking me questions. She wanted to know about the client. She wanted to know about the problems that the client was facing. She wanted to know about the staff who were applied to the project. She wanted to know 100 things.
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked, her recommendations started to emerge from the conversation. Which person do you think I hired for that job?
Obviously the second.
Of course. And the reason is she was immediately engaged. Too often our interviews are structured around the resume and around the job description, and they're not structured around the person that you're talking with. And what we have to do is we have to learn how to sort out who the individual is that we are confronting with this job.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to determine what kind of human being we're going to have a relationship with over the next, I don't know how many years.
Mm-hmm.
And that requires dialogue. That requires conversation. That requires getting to know one another. And I think that's probably the most important thing I can tell you about selecting people in. Take the time to get to know who they are, really.
Mm-hmm.
I've done the same thing with physicians. I've done the same thing with nursing staff. And the more you can give them a challenge and then ask them to deal with the challenge, the more you're going to learn about who they are and what they're made of.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's talk about selecting out
Sure.
for a minute. In every organization, I've learned that you're going to have people who I would define as cynics, apathetics,
Definitely.
naysayers, people who are kind of checked out on where the organization's going and what they're about. With these folks, you've got to give them a chance to understand what is really required, and you've got to take the time with them to say, look, I see these behaviors, I see this in you. Is there something going on that I can help you with? Because I want to see a change. And this is specifically what I need you to change. You have to have that conversation. If they don't change, if they don't start to align their behavior and their work to the needs of the organization, you're probably going to have another conversation that goes something like, I need you to be successful somewhere else.
Yeah.
I need you because what you're doing is not in alignment with what we're trying to accomplish. So how do I help you find your next career position somewhere else? You're not happy here, and I don't think I want an unhappy employee on my staff.
Yeah.
Those two conversations are very, very important conversations to teach leaders how to have. You select people in, you also select people out.
Yeah. I have sometimes in an overly simplified way said to people, in my experience, as you start to get serious about working on your culture, typically, if you evaluate the current staff in terms of their degree of fit in the culture we're trying to build, they usually will fall into three groups, probably not that dissimilar to what you've identified. One group are typically people, and it's usually the largest percentage in a good company. There might be 70 or 75% of people who are a really good fit and they're great people. And, if I was hiring again, I'd hire them. Yep. And then there's usually a middle group, in my experience, of about 20% or so, who are in a category that I say, they're not bad. If I was hiring today, I don't know that they'd make the cut, but it's not like they're ruining the company. And those people, I always advise we should be coaching, mentoring, trying to do everything we can to help them be successful. But to your point, most of them aren't going to make it. But I want to give them every chance. We want them to be successful. And then I find there's typically 0 to 5% who are those people who are the cynics, the ones with the lousy attitudes that are working against us. And those people, in my view, I want to clear those people out as fast as we can because they're undermining everything we're trying to do to be successful. But most of them, the middle group are the ones that we want to be coaching and helping, but most of them aren't going to make it at the end of the day.
Absolutely correct. I love how you've created the spread. And in poor cultures, the percentages might be different.
Right.
You might have a lot more cynicism and apathy than what you've just described. I did a show of hands with a group of about 150 managerial leaders in one organization. It was a fun day with them. And about the middle of the day, I asked for a show of hands. How many of you have what you would consider marginal employees on your staff? Literally, every hand in the room went up.
Mm-hmm.
I then said, how many of you have had a conversation with those marginal staff within the last 30 days? 10 hands went up.
Yeah.
Well, who's marginal here? Is it the staff or is it the management?
Yeah.
We have to be pretty. We have to do our jobs as leaders if we want the culture to become what the culture needs to be.
Well, my experience of that, and I would agree with you 100%, is that so often we are annoyed at how people are, but we've never been very clear about setting expectations about what it is that we're looking for. We're just annoyed they're not being how we want them to be.
Yeah, but what I find in some industries, particularly in healthcare, when you start having this conversation about, that's not working, that person's that cynicism is not helping us. Well, but she's a great nurse,
right? Of course.
This doctor, we depend on his revenue. We have to have this doctor. And it's like, wait a minute, you're sabotaging your own success.
Absolutely. Yes. We're telling people our culture is really important unless you're hard to replace.
There you go.
Then it's not so important. The phrase that I have often said is that the best way for me to know any company's culture is to look at the behavior that they tolerate. What they allow to continue to take place. That's the real culture. Everything else is just a bunch of fluff.
The other side of that too is there is a human side of this. I've had conversations with people who are in that cynics, apathetics, and naysayer role. And when I really dig deeply into why they're feeling the way they're feeling, they sometimes break down in tears. They are very unhappy people.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And because of that unhappiness, they're acting out. And if you can find a way to bridge that unhappiness in some way, you might be able to help them become more aligned. You might be able to help them become happy by leaving the organization. I was sitting with a physician one day. I had done some assessment work with him and his colleagues in a practice they had. And this physician, in my one-on-one with him, broke down in tears as he was looking at the data he got from his raters.
Wow.
It wasn't his raters really did him a favor by telling him the truth about his behavior. And I asked him why he was in tears. And he said, I hate my job.
Wow.
And we were silent for a minute. And he said, well, what do you say about that? And I said, my reaction is, I never want you to touch my body as a physician.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not happy in your work, you need to do something else. What would you love to do? He said, you know what I love? I love being out in the woods. I like working with animals. I like being somebody who's tromping around in his boots and driving around in his Jeep. I said, why don't you do that? 9 months later, he was a forest ranger, no longer practicing medicine.
Well, it was
happier,
good for everybody.
And that's exactly where he belongs.
Yes.
He
did a favor to his patients.
So.
Yeah, interesting. Well, Roger, this has been a fascinating conversation. I have two last questions for you.
Sure.
So one, I'm always curious about anybody in any role, and certainly somebody that's had the vast amount of experience. I'm not making a comment about your age here, just that you're lots of experience. I'm always curious about, I find that there are things that we learn over time that we look back in our career and think, how did I not see that before? Like in retrospect, with perspective, there's wisdom, hopefully, that we gain that we didn't have when we were younger. What's one piece of sort of wisdom that, if you were coaching your 22-year-old self, the 22-year-old Roger, and sharing some of the wisdom you've learned over your years, what would you be saying to that 22-year-old Roger that maybe you didn't realize back then?
Wow, great question. Thinking back when I was 22, freshly married, first baby on the way, bachelor's degree in hand, and I was in charge of the world. I think if I were to do some of the instrumented profiles that I've been exposed to over my lifetime, if I were to do some of those at the age of 22, I probably would have come across as one of the most arrogant sons of beasts that you could
do everything.
But you know what? I would tell that arrogant person to humble up, listen and learn. You got a whole lot of life in front of you and a whole lot of learning to do, and it's going to be a great ride. So don't get too cocky. Yes. Don't get too cocky. That would, as you asked me that question, that's where it would go. I tend to think that all of my different areas of education, my master's degree, my doctorate, they all humbled me from one step to another. What a doctor tells you is what you don't know.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, that's life. I keep learning, and I'm still learning.
That's great. My last question for you. So if our audience members want to learn more about your last book or your consulting work, where would they go? Tell me how people would find out more about you.
I tell every leader that the first thing they have to do, and the most important learning for them, is to go and see, and then go and do something about what you see. Go and see, go and do. To find me or to find my books, go to my website, rogergerard.com, and you'll find links to my books on Amazon. You'll find all kinds of links to my blogs on LinkedIn. I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find other podcasts that I've done. It's all there on my website, rogergerard.com.
And we'll put that in the show notes, but Gerard is Gerard for those that are listening to this and not looking at something, but we'll put those in the show notes too. Well, Roger, I really appreciate you being with us. It's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you for contributing to the education of our own audience in learning how to be better leaders, how to build better cultures, how to help people to perform at their best and create environments that enable them to perform at their best. Really appreciate you being with us this morning.
David, thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed the conversation as well. It was fun.
Great. And that's it for today's episode of Culture Architects with Dr. Roger Gerard, owner of Sloan & Gerard Consulting and the author of Lead with Purpose, Reignite Passion and Engagement for Professionals in Crisis. Folks, if you've been enjoying our show, make sure you subscribe, and that way you'll automatically get updates on my newest episodes and guests. If you have a minute, I'd also love it if you could leave us a review, and that way more culture fans like you can discover the show. And if you want to learn more about building a high-performing culture in your organization, check us out at CultureWise.com. See you next time on Culture Architects.
This has been Culture Architects with David J. Friedman. Join us next time for more insights and wisdom from great leaders in all walks of life. To book David for your next event or to learn more about his writing, speaking, or consulting, go to davidjfriedman.com. Culture Architects with David J. Friedman is a production of CultureWise.